Hi, my name is Sarah Fite in Dr. Weaver's Bio 370, and this is my presentation on body plan and locomotion. In Module 3, we look at vertebrates moving onto land from being solely aquatic to becoming terrestrial. One of the major locomotive challenges in moving from an aquatic environment to a terrestrial environment was gravity. Animals had adapted ways to remain buoyant in the water, but the adaptations for the aquatic environment did not work on land. A second challenge was that locomotion on land requires more energy than it does in water. Citation Vandenbroek 2018. During this time, we see the skeletal structure of animals changing to bones that are more dense on the outside but spongier on the inside. Having bones that were less dense on the inside helped with the amount of weight an animal had to support on land. At this time, we also see the development of limbs continuing down into the lobe fins of the fish to support them as they walk in shallow water environments. The limbs start coming down underneath the animal to help with support when walking. This continued downland development eventually led to the development of digits in land animals. The new flexibility of the wrist-like bone gave them the ability to lift themselves out of the water to be able to see if there were any prey nearby on land. There was also the development of boniopectoral and pelvic girdles that would help support the transition from water to land. They also aided in the ability to move the limb along with the development of synovial fluid in the joints to aid in smoother movements in the joints between the bones. There was also a separation of the cervical vertebrae from the pectoral girdle, allowing for more movement of the head up and down and side to side, which aided in the catching of food. There was also a stiffening of the trunk to provide more space for the lungs. On land, oxygen was more plentiful, but since it required more energy for movement, large lung capacity was required. During this transition time, animals were not fully terrestrial, but were developing all of these new traits that would eventually give them the ability to be fully terrestrial. Vandenbroek, 2018. During the Devonian period, oxygen levels were high, and there was a great diversity of land plants and insects. This enabled aquatic tetrapods to adapt in order to take advantage of the new food sources on land. These new resources led to the development of amniotic eggs and tetrapods, also helping with the transition to land-dwelling animals. This was also a time of more shallow seas and wetlands. Animals could move from one shallow wetland to another in search of food. With the ability to move their limbs on land and the abundance of food, animals were able to make the transition to becoming fully terrestrial. Citation George 2011. Mastodontosaurus was a member of the Temnospondyls and lived around 247 million years ago after the Permian-Triassic extinction. They were well adapted to aquatic life and fed on a diverse population of fish during that time. The earth was very hot, but had a lot of shallow, swampy, and wetland areas, as mentioned before, for these animals to live in. However, when the freshwater lakes and swamps began to dry up, the Mastodontosaurus went extinct. They were also one of the largest known amphibians to have ever lived. They were around 20 feet long, with its head making up about 5 feet of that. Its eyes and nostrils were on top of its head like a modern alligator. It also had 28 trunk vertebrae and a long tail used to propel itself forward. It had long overlapping ribs and dense bones. It was likely to have been an ambush animal that was where they were around the shores or in shallow waters. Shock 2024. The archelon was the largest turtle to live, and some reached up to 15 feet long. They lived during the Cretaceous period, around 74 million years ago. Unlike modern turtles, archelon shells were lightweight and leathery, but the structure underneath was the framework of ribs. It resembled modern leatherback sea turtles and was an ocean-dwelling animal. It had large front flippers for swimming. Though its shell was lightweight, the bones in its limbs were dense and heavy. The strong limb bones made it well adapted for open ocean swimming. However, like modern day sea turtles, they were slow moving on land. Citation Tong 2006. Epistolosteigids had a reduced tail fin and no dorsal or anal fin. It was dorsoventrally flattened with its eyes and nasal passages on top of its skull. They also had ventrally projecting ribs, which helped support the body structure. With all of these new features, it was believed that they would use their front limbs to lift their heads out of water in order to see prey near them. Citation Vandenbroek 2018. Tiktaalik was a transition animal from the fish to the tetrapods. It still had gills, fin rays, and poorly ossified bones, but it had lost its bony operculum, which meant that it could move its head up and down and side to side, as mentioned before. Also aiding in raising itself out of the water was a primitive wrist in the front limb. These pectoral fins also had the beginning formations of what would become digits in future tetrapods. They also had large overlapping ribs, giving them structure and stability out of the water. They also had a jaw full of teeth to capture prey. Citation Vandenbroek 2018. Ichthyostega was still not fully terrestrial, but it was a tetrapod. It still had gills, but it also had lungs, which are encased in overlapping ribs. It had fully developed limbs with digits to support its movement onto land. They were true predators with many teeth. Vandenbroek 2018. Acanthostega has some similarities to Ichthyostega, but there were a lot of differences as well. It did not have as well developed or strong limbs like Ichthyostega. They also did not have overlapping ribs or reduced of a tail fin. Also, its pelvis wasn't as fully developed as Ichthyostega. Acanthostega was more like a less well-developed Ichthyostega. It was still aquatic, but was able to raise itself out of the water to capture prey on land, but was not terrestrial. Citation Vandenbroek 2018. Reptiliomorphs are almost completely terrestrial animals and resemble modern reptiles. They also are the first tetrapods with 5 digits. They had well-developed limbs and ribs to support their body structure on land. Citation Vandenbroek 2018. Tetrapods are varied in their formation and movement, but they all possess 4 limbs with digits, though some species have secondarily lost their limbs. They also share the trait of a vertebral column and a skull built for stability. They are well adapted for locomotion on land. Some have their limbs under their bodies, while others remain out to the side, but they have all developed ways to move and breathe efficiently. Citation Vandenbroek 2018. Amphibians are very diverse in their body form and their locomotion. There are frogs that have different fore and hind leg lengths that are used for walking, hopping, or swimming. There are salamanders that have their legs out to the side and walk or run in an undulating manner. And there are even legless amphibians that move more like a snake or a worm. They share the traits of an operculum bone attached to their ear to help them take in sound through their tympanic membrane. They also share the trait of having bicuspid teeth that have a crown and the root being separate. Citation Vandenbroek 2018. Amniots have diverse body forms and an expanded rib cage to aid with breathing air. They were no longer using buccal pumping to breathe, so this expanded bone structure made the transition to land possible. They also had long necks, which also aided in breathing and increased the ability to move their forelimbs. Citation Vandenbroek 2018. Squamata also have diverse body forms. Some have the limbs and some have secondarily lost their limbs. They tend to have long tails, which can detach when being threatened by a predator. It gives them the opportunity to try and escape. Most of them still have an move in an undulating fashion, which is the ancestral trait. Citation Vandenbroek 2018. Serpents are all elongated and limbless animals. They have reduced skull bones that are modified to allow them to open their mouths very wide to eat prey whole. There are 4 different methods of locomotion. The first is serpentine, which is using the body to push against the substrate to move themselves forward. The second is rectilinear, which is alternating sections of the animal lifting off the ground and pulling forward using muscles. The third is concertine, which is an inchworm type motion movement. And lastly, there is sidewinding, which is when 2 to 3 body points contact the surface at one time, pushing the snake along the ground, appearing to move sideways. Citation Vandenbroek 2018. These are the articles that I used for my research. Thank you for watching my presentation.